Back in the 80s, I thought I was strong enough to work in a children's psychiatric hospital. I loved kids, always wanted them, so I thought this was a good way for me to be involved and help those that could use an adult figure. Many of the kids I saw come in there had real disorders or experienced traumatic events that will probably always affect them. But then there were also cases where the kids just seemed to be a bit more eccentric and their parents didn't know how to handle them, so this was the easiest option for them. I was warned by several people to never let your guard down, always keep an open mind, and don't take everything at face value. But things always look easier until you actually try it for yourself. That pretty much summed me up when I went into this job. One day, we got this little girl I'll call Shelby. Shelby was about 8, I believe, and on the surface, seemed to be a very kind and intelligent girl. When she first came in, she was very quiet and shy, and I usually saw her sitting alone, reading or coloring. When a patient comes in, though, we have an entrance interview to kind of get an idea of what they may be suffering from and what kind of treatment we can do to help them. I didn't get to attend hers, but I heard from other staff that it went pretty normal. She was healthy on the outside, but when they talked to her about her thoughts, all she really said was, "Sometimes I think about bad things, and I can't help it." They tried to clarify, but they said she didn't or wouldn't really go into detail. She wouldn't even specify if it was when she was mad or scared or brought on by a specific incident or anything either. Now, this was normal to see too. Sometimes the kids didn't really open up to anyone for a few sessions, or some sadly seemed to even be rehearsed by parents that just wanted them out. So we were told to proceed as normal, keep an eye out, and report anything she may do or say to us. So doing what I did best, I tried to get the girl to open up some, and maybe even play with the other kids. My thought was, they are still children, so they should still get to play and enjoy their childhood. I approached Shelby multiple times with just small talk and different activities to see if she would be interested in any of them. As expected, she was hesitant, but she slowly started letting her walls down. It was innocent enough at first. She talked to me about her mom, her bedroom, and how much she missed it and couldn't wait to go back. She even told me things that she liked to do, such as quilting with her mom and paper mache. I thought it was pretty impressive and thought maybe I could get the supers to get more craft supplies and do something similar. We had outdoor days on occasions for those that were a lower level threat, and I remember going and playing hopscotch with Shelby. After some time, we stopped and just sat on the bench, talking about random things, when she stopped mid-sentence to ask, "How long do you think it takes for a person to bleed out?" I, of course, didn't know how to respond, so I just said something like, "I have no idea," and asked why she asked. She just shrugged and, as if it was the same conversation we were having, said, "I don't know," as she giggled and returned to our original conversation. I had to tell the staff about it, unfortunately, in case it was a potential safety issue, and they were surprised, saying she wouldn't talk to or open up to anyone else. She had been sharing a room with another low-risk girl, but this conversation made them go in and take any potential dangers or risks out of the room. She seemed a little upset that we had to remove some of their supplies, but she didn't cause a scene or act out or anything because of it. She just seemed to understand. The weird conversations didn't stop though. Again, I was talking to her about something unimportant when she stopped to ask me, "How much force would it take to break someone's neck?" I was stunned and again shrugged like I didn't know, but she continued into this a little while longer. She was holding a stuffed animal at the time and was pretty much acting out what she meant. She continued on asking things like, "I wonder if it would be easier to just squeeze it, or maybe if you step on it, or maybe throw something on it." This whole time, she is acting it out on this little stuffed animal. I did my best to hide my reactions to this, but she didn't seem fazed either, as she then wrapped up the conversation and went back to talking about what we were talking about before. I was in shock. I know it may seem stupid now, but everything about her seemed so normal. I was curious as to what made her like this, and even a little sad that she was so young and had thoughts like those. She shouldn't even know what any of that meant. Again, I went back to the leads and told them what she had mentioned to me and asked me to sit in on one of her interviews to see if maybe I could get her to talk more. I agreed, but the conversation wasn't much more in depth than what I was getting before. We definitely tried to steer the conversations, talking about what she wanted, then changing the subject to something like the above. She would ask what's the quickest way for someone to die. Is it easy to suffocate someone? Can you suffocate yourself? And so on. It was apparently enough for them to agree that she probably shouldn't be sharing a room, so she was moved to a single room. She was not happy with the idea though, and decided that she didn't want to leave her room for about a week. She didn't do anything violent or destroy the room or anything. She just sat at the little desk that was in there, staring at the wall. She even got some of her supplies back, like her paper, crayons, and paint, but when she did use them, they were simple pictures and doodles, nothing like she used to do. When she finally decided to come back out in the living area, she proceeded as she normally did, coloring with a stuffed animal next to her, but she didn't really want to talk with me much, so I left her alone. Everything seemed to be fine. We did our rounds and even had a camera room where security could watch as well. It was the 80s, as I mentioned, so the cameras weren't the best, and they kind of flipped between them all, but they did a great job watching them. Shelby asked for something specific to drink, like orange juice or milk, so I agreed to go get some. I thought I would do a special treat for the kids, as we were able to do that sometimes, and started gathering drinks and snacks with the cafeteria staff. As I was heading back, I heard someone call a code brown. That was when a kid was missing. It didn't happen often, but sometimes they tried to leave, sometimes they just wandered off to hide, so I was on alert and ready to start searching. But I'll say I wasn't too worried at that point, until I got back up to the living area and started hearing more calls for red and all security. Red meant there was violence, and they were calling in for help. That's where I became worried because they were being called to the garden, which was part of the living area. I ditched the cart of snacks and ran towards the area, and to my horror, I watched as security had to pull Shelby off of another girl who had what looked like a pillowcase or something around her neck. The other girl, of course, turned out okay, but she was turning purple and was almost unconscious. Shelby was, of course, punished, meaning she wasn't allowed activities with others or in her room and was locked in her room. I learned from the supers and the doctor that when asked why she did it, she said she just wanted to know what it was like to kill someone and to watch what happened to someone when she did. She had managed to find a blind spot in the cameras and lured over the girl and used her pillowcase to strangle her. This brought on changes to the bedding, among a lot of other things at that point. I learned a valuable lesson from her though. You really can't see everything about a person on the outside, even children. I did hear from one of my friends that work there that she did end up leaving the facility, but I ended up leaving first. It wasn't as easy as I expected. I'm in pediatrics now and have been since, but I truly do hope that she was able to go on to live a much better life.
This happened when I was working as a part-time cleaner in a hospital. I would clean at around midnight as there were less patients and doctors around. It was the working hours I was given, so I couldn't really complain. One night, after all my cleaning was done, and I had put all my equipment away, I got in the elevator and headed for the ground floor. At that time, there were no doctors, nurses, or anyone around. It was really quiet, and I couldn't hear or see any of the patients. I got in the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor, like always. Except this time, when I pressed it, the doors closed and the elevator went down. Despite me pressing the button for the ground floor of the elevator, it went down to the underground floors. I continued to press the button for the ground floor, but it was no good. The elevator stopped at the second basement floor. It was really weird. It had never happened before. I didn't like this floor, especially not at night, because all that was down there were post-mortem examination rooms in the morgue. Who is calling the elevator down here at this time of night? I wondered. I was the only night shift worker that night. Why was someone messing with the elevator? I got out of the elevator on this floor, and I went to check if anyone had wandered down here. The jolting sound of the elevator doors closing shocked me, and the elevator started heading back up. It was going non-stop to the highest floor in the building. I couldn't understand why, as there was nothing but a storeroom and a door which accesses the roof up there. It was off limits to patients, and only cleaning staff like me had any business going up there. I called the elevator back to the floor I was on, and it finally arrived and the doors opened. There was no one in the elevator, but there was something wrong. I got in, and I smelled something terrible. The elevator stank of copper. I recognized the smell, and it was the smell of blood. It was inside the elevator, and yet the elevator was clean. I couldn't bear being in that elevator. I had to get out and use the stairs on the floor above. I entered the stairwell, and I was certain that someone was watching me. It felt like someone was right behind me. I ran as fast as I could up those stairs, but I couldn't escape that feeling. I felt for sure that I wasn't alone, but every time that I looked back, I realized that I was the only one on those stairs. I finished my shift and felt creeped out on the long walk home. But once I was home, I felt a little better. I had work the next day and I was a little apprehensive. I saw some of my colleagues and they were asking me if I heard the news about last night. I said that I didn't know, and I asked what happened. They said that someone had taken the elevator to the top floor and jumped. They said that the body was admitted to the morgue last night. It was shocking to hear that. I didn't really believe in anything paranormal, so I didn't even make a connection to what happened the night before, and I just got on with my work. The next day was a day off for me, and I invited a friend over for a few drinks. He is a pretty strange guy to some, I guess. He claims to have the second sight, the ability to sense the presence of the dead. I thought that he might get a kick out of my little mysterious experience, so I told him what happened. He listened carefully, but he began to get a little fidgety. I figured that he just needed the toilet, so I ignored him. Then suddenly, he shot to his feet and said, "I am leaving." I asked what the problem was. I said I had loads more of booze, and I needed his help to drink it all. He couldn't be convinced to stay though. I was annoyed at him, and instead of staying up and drinking alone, I decided to go to bed. I had a terrible nightmare that night. I was being forced into this small and confined area. Cold steel metal was all around me, and it was so horrible. The next day, I asked my friend what the problem was and why he left so abruptly. Get this, it's really weird from here on in. He said that while I was talking, for some reason, he looked over towards my door and saw a woman peering at us through the gap in the letterbox. You know, the mail slot? Well, we all know that there is no one that can fit their head through a mail slot, right? Well, you'd have to have a really flat or mashed up head, I guess. And that thought lingered in my head and made me feel quite sick. I didn't like looking at the mail slot after that. Could that be the spirit of the poor person who jumped, followed me from the morgue to my home, and watched me through the mail slot? It was too impossible to believe. I hope my friend was just messing with me. It wasn't a funny prank if that was the case, though. And I ended up moving away, and things got a bit better after that. It's a weird little tale that I wanted to share. So, thank you for listening.
Back in 2004, I started getting these really weird pains in my side, and since I didn't have the best insurance, I tried to tough it out and take over-the-counter medications to get it to go away. But when the pain worsened to the point that I had to call in for work, my mom rushed me to the hospital because she found me passed out on the bathroom floor. I had called her and told her about what was happening, and she suggested I go to the doctor. I'm just thankful I agreed to let her drive me there that day. So I went to the ER and found out that I had appendicitis that ended up causing my appendix to rupture. They were shocked that I still went to work when I did because people typically are in way too much pain, not to mention the vomiting and other unpleasant symptoms. I just hid them well. Anyways, this caused me to stay in the hospital for several days, as I had to have surgery and then recover, of course. The surgery was pretty immediate, so I remember being given the anesthetic and my mom saying she'll see me soon, then I was out. I remember dreaming a bit, but I could still hear what I assume was the doctor and nurses in surgery based on what they were saying. At one point, the tone in the doctor's voice seemed to change to someone that was angry or stressed, maybe. As the patient, laying there without being able to move or talk or even open my eyes, it was pretty terrifying. Then I felt a very sharp pain in my side, and I passed out again. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room with an oxygen tube under my nose. I could move my arms, which also had an IV in it, but I couldn't seem to move my legs. I figured it was just because I was too weak and gave in to going in and out of sleep. I woke up a few times to see a nurse coming in and checking my vitals, and at one point, there was one particular nurse that came in that I remember quite well. She had short, curly hair, and she wore one of those hairnets over it all, almost like what I remember the ladies wearing in the cafeteria in school. She was always wearing red lipstick and had a fair complexion. On top of this, she was wearing an old-fashioned nurse uniform, not the normal scrubs I saw all the other nurses wearing. Regardless of what she was wearing, though, she was beautiful, but also spoke very soft and very kind. I encountered her on multiple occasions, and at times that I seemed even remotely upset or uncomfortable, she was quick to be able to console me. The first time I met her, she had come in to check the machine and the IV I was hooked to, and when she noticed I was awake, she greeted me and told me her name, Beth. She said if I needed anything, to just call for her and she'd be in. She talked to me a bit about what all happened to me because I was curious, and my mom also wasn't around. She told me that my body seemed to want to give up when it was confronted by an infection, but she wouldn't let it happen. She told me the surgery went fine otherwise, and I would just be here till I fully recovered. It sounded about right based on what I heard while in surgery, and I'm also not a doctor, so I had no reason to question it. I mentioned she was there to console me because I felt like I was there for a few days when I thought I should have been able to leave by now. I would feel some discomfort at times, but Beth was always there to put an end to it. I would start getting upset because I hadn't seen my mom, and it was not like her to not be here at all. I was, and still am, really close to her, so to not see her when I awoke in my room, in what I presume was at least 3 days after, started to really get to me. I asked Beth about it, and she looked a bit upset. She was still smiling, but you could tell it was a forced smile. She told me she wants to see you too, but it seems like you're struggling to let her in. I was confused what she meant by that, since it wasn't like I could stop anyone from coming in. I told her I wasn't stopping her and requested that the next time she saw her, to tell her, even demand, that she come in to see me. She said she would do as I asked, but again said, you need to let her through. I was confused, but again I let it go because I was frustrated and confused, but still felt weak and constantly tired. It had to be about a week of me being there, going between pleasant conversations with Beth and being angry that I was only being told I can leave when I want, but for some reason, I never did just get up and leave, and I had no idea why. I was also still confused as to why my mom was nowhere around. I felt bad, but I pretty much snapped at Beth, saying things like I was done with this and I didn't want to be here anymore, and that was the only time I had seen her frown. She grabbed my hand, and while her skin was soft, it was also very cold, which made me jump a bit. She looked me in the eyes and said, Sam, you need to leave. It is not your time, and your mother is worried about you. I just remembered being even more flustered, and I started crying, saying I'm trying and that I didn't want to be here. That's when, while smiling again, she smacked me in the face. This stopped me in my tracks, and I just looked at her. She got up to leave and again said, go, please, and left the room. I just sat there pretty much pouting until I fell asleep again. Except this time, I could hear my mom talking. She was on the phone because it was a one-sided conversation. I turned my head to see her pacing over by the window and talking, but once she noticed me looking at her, she pretty much screamed my name and dropped the phone. She ran over to my side, crying and asking me so many questions when a nurse came in as well. I told her I was fine, other than feeling weak, and asked her where she had been. She said she'd been there this whole time, and the nurse checked my eyes, asked me what my name was, what day it was, and they both seemed surprised when I said the correct date. She asked me if I had been awake this whole time, and when I said yes, the nurse looked suspicious of me and said that she would call for the doctor. While we waited, my mom explained further what she had witnessed. I had been in a coma for 6 days. The surgery seemed to go fine, but then the infection or something caused by my appendix had spread, and I pretty much flatlined in surgery. They got me stable again, but I had to proceed with caution and surgery and told my mom to prepare for the worst, just in case. The whole time, my mom had been in the room with me, talking, trying to do or say anything to try and get me to wake up, but nothing was working. I was confused because of everything I experienced, and I told her about Nurse Beth. She told me I never had a nurse named Beth, and none that matched the description I gave. My mom thought it was weird, but chalked it up to just being part of the coma and just couldn't get over the fact that I was back. Unfortunately, I was there for a few more days after that, with my mom and a less pleasant nurse, but to do more tests to make sure I was good to leave and to practice walking since I hadn't in a week now. But I couldn't get over the whole experience I witnessed after my surgery. Obviously, I had to have dreamt all of that, but the whole experience felt so real. It was hard to believe none of it happened. And who was the very specific nurse that I only seemed to see or have an interaction with? I told my friends about it, and even my mom more, weeks after leaving the hospital. She said she may have been my guardian angel, making sure I was okay and probably even trying to get me to wake up without being creepy about it, I guess. It always stayed in the back of my mind until one time a few years later, my grandma had to go to that same hospital and my mom and I went to visit her. I offered to go to the cafeteria and get us all a drink, and next to it was a wall of photos of previous owners and I think people that donated to the hospital. To my surprise, I saw a picture of an older woman that looked just like Nurse Beth, and the nameplate even said Elizabeth. I looked into it when I went home and found out that she was a nurse there. I found a picture of her in almost the exact same uniform, hair, and makeup that I remembered her in. She had donated a lot of money and time to this hospital and was well known to many. She sadly succumbed to breast cancer at the age of 54, but they made a memorial for her in the back garden of the hospital. I am now convinced that she is still there, taking care of her patients the best way she can. And I think I have to thank her for literally smacking some sense into me.
This happened when I was a high school student during summer holidays. My friends and I wanted to make some memories, so we decided to have a barbecue. We set up a barbecue in a field, and one of my friends said that there was an abandoned hospital nearby. Because I had never been ghost hunting or anything like that, I was up for checking out the abandoned hospital. And we were all pumped for some late-night urban exploration, and we went to inspect the hospital at around 11 p.m. I don't know how long ago the hospital was built, but it was really old. It was crumbling down in places, and we approached the entrance, and my friend said, "Guys, it's easy if we go in a big group, but that's boring, so let's split up." So we split up into 2 groups of 3. The first group were ready to go in. Then after a little while, the second group was set to go in. I was in the first group. The atmosphere even in the entrance was so heavy. Do you know what I mean? My heart was thundering in my chest. However, the doors were locked. I thought that maybe we could break the door down if we tried, but the other lads didn't fancy it, and I decided to look around the perimeter for a weak spot to gain access. I found that one of the walls had collapsed around the back, and I could see inside. I let the others know, and we decided to go in through there. We were in. It was humid in there. The air was moist and damp, and there wasn't the usual stuff that you would expect in an abandoned hospital. There were no syringes, patient charts, or doctor equipment. The walls were just covered in mad scribblings, and they didn't make much sense. There were beds, and something was placed on top of one of the beds. Some twisted shape beneath the black cloth, and it creeped me out. And there were origami cranes strewn around the place. I thought about why they might be there. Maybe someone put them there for a reason that I don't understand. It was really weird. We crept through the hallway until we came to a room with a closed door. I pushed it open, and that's when we saw it. A doll in front of something like an altar, like a crude offering. The doll was quite big, and it was tattered and raggedy. We went closer to it, but none of us wanted to be the one who said, "Let's go." But I could tell my friends wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. There was a cup in front of the doll, and there were 2 leaves in the cup. There was a green plate with something black on it. I looked into that doll's eyes, and in that moment I was terrified. I had to get out of there immediately. We went back to the barbecue area and then started to pack our things away. I called one of my friends in the second group to see how they were getting on. And back at the barbecue, my friends and I didn't say anything for a while until one of them said, "That altar was really messed up." "I hated that doll. It gave me such a weird feeling," I replied. "Was it an offering of some kind?" he asked. We all saw the doll in the first group, but no one in the second group saw the doll. Perhaps there were other things like that in there. It was honestly the weirdest place that I have ever been to. And by the next week, all three of us who saw the doll had ended up with an injury. I broke my little finger during PE, and my friend got into a motorbike accident and broke his toe. Another friend got into another accident involving a motorbike, and he crashed, and he was in the hospital for days. A teacher asked us while laughing, "What happened to you three? Are you cursed or something?" We felt it was no laughing matter, and even to this day, that abandoned hospital still stands. It hasn't been demolished yet, but a sign that reads, "Keep Out," has been put up and a large metal fence surrounds it. Don't go looking for it. Don't go in there. I am a doctor, and I have worked in many hospitals, but I feel like sharing an experience that happened when I was practicing before getting my full accreditation. I was sent to a hospital to earn my stripes, and this is what happened out there. A few weird and arguably spooky things have happened over the course of my career, but this one sticks out in my mind. Let me explain a little about the layout of the hospital. The main building is basically shaped like a capital letter L. There was a newer part of the building, which was just off the L, just at the tip of the long side of that L. The main building was really run down and old, and the lights were usually out at night if they weren't broken. It wasn't a great place to be. The nurses' area was well lit, just this long L shape wasn't. So, as you might expect, as a junior doctor on the night shift in a place which was ill-lit, yeah, I had my apprehensions and I had to wrestle with some fear there. The nurses' station was well lit though, and that's where I chose to hang out since I was on call. I sat there dreading the call, not because I didn't want to help or fulfill my oath, but I just hated venturing into the darkness alone. Well, one early morning during the infancy of my residency, I received a call. I think it came in at around 2 a.m. It was from a patient at the new building. But I knew that to get to the new building, I would have to pass through the L-shaped dark old building, as I mentioned before. I was scared of the dark, but more scared of the patients. The hospital that I was earning my stripes in was one for the mentally insane. Usually, you wouldn't see the patients unless you weren't in their specific room or into the isolation wards. Now, I want to tell you that I was very careful each time I unlocked the door, just in case there was a patient on the other side of it. And since it was 2 a.m., I was reasonably confident that all but one patient who called would be in bed asleep. So, I checked that there was no one in the L-shaped building, and I began heading towards the main building to answer the call. All the doors in the building are sliding doors, and they all face the hallway. I was a little nervous that one of them would slide open and that I would be alone in the dark with a patient. I decided to walk as quickly as I could so that I could get to the new brighter building as fast as I could. And I had a long way to go and I was dreading it. Usually, I'm not so jumpy. But for some reason, that night I was. With every step I took, I heard my heels echo in the hall. Then, I heard another sound mix in. Another set of footprints. I stopped, and then the footprints behind me stopped after a step or two. Never in my life before or after has it felt like every strand of hair was standing on end. I decided to start walking quickly, but the second that I did, I heard the footsteps behind me develop into a run, and they were getting closer. I ran for a few meters and stopped out of pure fear. My legs wouldn't carry me. I was faced with a terrible dilemma: to look back or not. I tried to push the notion of a ghostly spirit chasing me out of my mind. I had a duty of care. I pulled myself together for the sake of the patients. But I'll admit, I was terrified of whatever had been chasing me. I looked back, and there was no one there. That was enough. I panicked and scrambled for any available light source, but as I turned to run, I felt a sharp pull. Something had a hold of my lab coat and was pulling me back into the dark. I felt a new emotion. Anger had now replaced fear. I must have been struggling to get away for about 10 seconds. It could have been less. Before, I saw nothing when I turned back, but now I was certain that I would, as I noticed something in my peripheral field of vision. I turned, and I was faced with a very small-framed old lady. She couldn't have been taller than 130 to 140 centimeters. That's about 4 feet 5 inches. It was a patient, and thank God it was. I took her back to her room and asked to go back to sleep. She was silent and complicit. I headed to the main building to answer that call, and I continued to think about her though. I was about 180 centimeters, or about 5'9", and she wasn't there when I looked back. I had no idea how she was able to sneak up on me and where she hid when I turned around, not to mention the reason why she didn't want anything. I should have heard her sliding a door open maybe, or was she waiting for someone that whole time in the dark? It was silent in that hallway. It was very mysterious. I was too scared to go back through that hallway again that night, so I stayed in the other newer ward. Since I was in a hospital, I chose to believe that it was a patient rather than something paranormal. And it's an experience that I won't ever forget.
Back in 2018, my best friend and I made plans for our first spring break style road trip. We had both pretty much grown up together since middle school, and we knew what we wanted to do after graduating. I wanted to become a teacher and her a veterinarian, so we hunted for the best school that would work for both of us so we could still be close. However, the school was in another state, so what else do we do but also find a place to share, which even saved us some money. Together, we actually budgeted pretty well. We always pulled out the money we needed for rent and other bills, so we knew it wouldn't be spent. However, between work and school, we didn't have a lot of time for play, so we decided to do something for ourselves. We planned a trip to North Carolina for spring break. We had plans to go to the beach, go hiking, and of course, party. We actually got a pretty good hotel and airline package thanks to her work, which saved us more money to actually spend on the trip. So onward to the actual trip, it had been going great. We took it easy the first day and just hit up the beach and went shopping. We went on the hiking trail the next day while we still had the energy, and on the third day, we lounged around in the hotel, went to a local diner, but otherwise we're just taking it easy. So we took this as our party day, or rather night, I suppose. Both looking our best, we headed out to a local bar to start with some drinks. We started a game of pool and were genuinely just having fun. At some point, a guy approached us, giving my friend advice on how to shoot as she was losing to me miserably. He offered to help, and she agreed, and after a few practice shots, she started figuring it out and almost beat me. We all started talking and laughing. He introduced himself as Johnny, and we gave our names. He seemed like a nice guy and genuine too. My friend, Jamie, seemed to be pretty interested in him, and he didn't give off any weird vibes, so I stuck around to hear him out too. Eventually, he mentioned a beach party that was going on that night and said that it was open to anyone that brought drinks, offering to take us there if we wanted to go. We had no reason to really say no and thought it would be a lot of fun, so we agreed. He did offer to drive us there, but we did have some sense to us, so we declined. It was the same beach we went to a few days earlier, so we said we would take an Uber back to the hotel, change into our swimsuits, and then just walk from the hotel. He didn't even push the matter, so I thought that was pretty cool too. So we did exactly as we stated, and when we got to the edge of the beach, Johnny was standing nearby and greeted us. He offered his arm to both of us, and we walked through the sand. We could see a group of people near a fire. Some were standing around drinking, some were playing beach volleyball, and some were just sitting and watching. As we approached, Johnny called out a few people and we were all introduced and offered drinks. They were the closed cans, so we accepted. We sat with some of them and talked and eventually tried volleyball. Neither of us really played before, and being buzzed, we were all over the place. But we all seemed to have a good time. They started playing music and we were all dancing and playing drinking games. Jamie was definitely enjoying Johnny's company. I found myself chatting it up with another girl that was there alone, playing a ukulele actually, who said she was just visiting like we were. After a bit of time had passed, it was now pretty dark and just the light of the fire in a nearby light. I wasn't quite ready to end the night, but I was getting a bit chilly. I wanted to go change or at least grab my jacket, so I thought I would ask Jamie if she wanted to go with me or if she wanted me to grab something for her. She wasn't on the bench where I last saw her, so I just looked around the beach, scanning the area of the party, and didn't see her. I asked the girl that I had been talking to if she saw her, and she said no. Same with a few others, so I started walking around. I ended up walking the whole shore, hoping to find her, maybe walking with Johnny at the least, but still no luck. I went back and asked a few more people hanging around, and some told me they didn't see where they went, confirming she was still with Johnny, and others claimed they didn't even know who I was talking about. At this point, I was feeling a bit sketch, not to mention frustrated. We were the only two girls that seemed to not understand volleyball, and were constantly failing and bumping into each other's. How do you not remember this person? I was also confused and upset that Jamie would just leave without telling me. Part of me did have it in mind that maybe she took him to our hotel room, but was fighting myself because that's just not something she would have done. We shared a room, so she would have at least sent me a text telling me not to go back yet. So I decided to risk the embarrassment and went back to the hotel room alone. I texted her asking where she was and that I was going back to our room, hoping that maybe a warning might help or that I would at least get a response. Yet I got nothing by the time I inserted my room key in the door. I wish I could say I found her passed out in there, but instead, what I did find made my heart drop. Our room had been ransacked and torn apart. Clothes were everywhere, the drawers were open, my purse was open, and my wallet taken. Jamie's entire purse was missing. We even had one of those book safes that was in my luggage that had been broken open. We kept our extra emergency funds in there in case anything happened. I was devastated and terrified. The only thing I had of value on me was my phone, a little cash, and ID. Thank God I took that with me. But more importantly, while the room looked like this, Jamie was still missing and she never responded to my text. I immediately tried calling her while I was in the room, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I was terrified and felt sick to my stomach. I was in a state I didn't know, surrounded by complete strangers. Most of our stuff was gone, and the one person I didn't know was missing. In between crying, I ran down to the front desk to report the room and call the cops. The hotel staff made a report, and when the police arrived, I told them about Jamie and our whereabouts. When they went up to our room, they concluded that it hadn't been broken in and that a key had to have been used. Thankfully, they had cameras in the halls, and they went to check the footage immediately. To my horror, I watched as Johnny approached the door, used the key, and went in. Alone. Jamie was not with him. Because of this, the police thankfully agreed it was suspicious and started searching the area. Some checked all the cameras to see if she wandered off somewhere else. Some searched all over the hotel and beach, and I even rode with one as we searched the nearby streets and stores. No luck. I was inconsolable as they took me to the station to make a more in-depth report. One of them then drove me back to the hotel, and surprisingly, they offered me a new room since one of the keys was obviously stolen. I accepted, thinking maybe she would show up in our old room, or maybe Johnny would come by again and we would be able to question him. That was a sleepless night. I kept calling and texting her phone, hoping that she would eventually reply, but I got nothing. We were supposed to be leaving in 2 days, and I wasn't going to leave without her. I had so many thoughts going through my head, not to mention the fear and sadness of putting my best friend in a horrible situation. There was no way I would be able to sleep. Then early that next morning, I think it was around 4 a.m., I got a call from the detective saying they think they found her. They said a woman showed up at a local hospital in a state of stupor, and due to the other things they noticed, they called authorities to report the incident. I took an Uber to the hospital where I met the detective, and they took me back to their room to identify her. Thank God it was her. She was awake and very aware of who we were, where she was, etc. Then she told me what all went down. She told me that after several drinks, she and Johnny were walking around the beach when they both made hints to go somewhere else. They started walking to his car when she realized she hadn't told me yet, so she pulled out her phone to text me when Johnny started to distract her and grab her phone from her. She said he was doing this in a playful manner, so she didn't think much of it at first. But then a woman came up to them and grabbed her phone from him, which caused her to panic a bit. Unfortunately, he had managed to get her in the car with the help of this woman, and that was the last thing she remembered until she woke up on a bench in a park. She then walked about a mile until she ended up at this hospital. She was still in her bathing suit, but her cover-up was gone, and she had nothing else on her, of course. They ended up doing tests and sadly confirmed she had been drugged, but otherwise didn't have any signs of SA, thankfully. But they did do the normal precautions just in case. The detectives then explained to us that they had seen similar occurrences to tourists, men and women alike. They were found drugged and had been robbed. So they most likely did this in hopes of a quick payout, I guess. But since all we really had on us were our phones, ID, and room key, they went for the room. Her purse was later found in a trash can behind the hotel, but of course, all the cash, cards, and ID were gone, and her phone was never found. She apologized profusely, but I wasn't even mad. All that stuff we could replace or figure out, but I couldn't replace her, so I was just incredibly thankful to have found her. But from then on, we doubled down and promised each other, no one, not a man nor a woman, will come between us. And while we're traveling, we are always within view.
This happened over 20 years ago. There was a phase my friends and I went through where we would go on dares and little nightly adventures. It was a late summer night. I went with 3 other friends, and we 4 would always get up to mischief together. The dare that night was to go into a famous abandoned hospital, which was about 20 minutes away by car. Actually, I've been to this abandoned hospital 3 times before, and I wasn't all that impressed or interested in going again. I mean, there was nothing but mountains and fields as far as the eye could see, as it was in the countryside and there were no girls there, so I was all like, what's the point, guys? But they managed to convince me that there wasn't much else to do that night and it would be fun. There were a bunch of rumors about the place. They say that it was originally a mental institution, that it was the largest abandoned hospital in all of Kanto, and they say that it's cursed, and there are even rumors about a secret basement. There were plenty of rumors like these, but now that I am older, I realized that I didn't ever doubt the credibility of these rumors. Unlike today, back then, these rumors were spread by word of mouth, and possibly by chain mail or text messages. We didn't have the internet to rely on. My friend drove and we took flashlights. It was really dark since it was in the middle of nowhere. We walked a few minutes in the dark and the road widened a little, and then we saw the hospital. It gave off a strange presence that night. It felt different. It was a 3-story building with a rooftop. This rooftop was said to be one of the most active spots for paranormal activities. They say that something lingers there. Well, the first time I came to the hospital, I thought that it was pretty scary, but now it was the 3rd time, and nothing had happened the previous times I came, so I wasn't really feeling creeped out or anything. It could have been because I was with 3 other guys too. We were passing through the overgrown bushes and thickets outside of the hospital ground, and that was when I came up with an idea. It wasn't really a dare if we all went as a group, I said to my friends. So I said that why don't we go up to the roof one by one, and then, when you get there, call the next person up. For the other guys, it was their first time, so I was hoping to see them getting all freaked out, and I thought it was a pretty decent idea. We played rock, paper, scissors to decide the order of who would go first and etc. I will refer to the friend who went first as A from here on out. A started off through the busted entrance doors, and we stood outside and watched. My 2 other friends were joking around and saying things like, "Why don't we just leave him here and go home?" Then we heard A shout from the rooftop, "Oi!" He got up there way faster than I expected. He must have sprinted. I looked up at A, and there were some other silhouettes up there with him, waving down to us. "What? There are other people here?" I said out loud. As I said, the abandoned hospital had become kind of legendary, as there was still medical equipment and records scattered throughout the building. It still felt like a hospital, and at the same time, it felt very abandoned. Does that make sense? I think this is why there were so many rumors. So it was popular with the young people in our area as well as people from outside the area. There were some who just wanted to see it from a tourist point of view, I guess. If you drove past on a weekend, you could always see cars parked there and people taking photos. I'm not sure if all these people went in, but it proved to be a popular place. So I said to my friend next to me, "Ah, man, there are people here even on weekday nights. This ain't good, man." Then he was called to the roof, which only left me and one other friend. Then I heard my friends call out to my final friend. "Oi!" they shouted. I looked closer and there seemed to be even more people up there than before. I guess that they were making friends. There looked to be about 10 people there. It didn't seem fun if there was a whole gang of people there. It was supposed to be spooky, right? And while I was thinking this, I heard my friend, who was the last to leave my company, call out to me. "Oi!" Charming. Everyone on the roof seemed to just be pacing around restlessly. I headed into the entrance, and the walls were scrawled with graffiti, and I climbed the stairs to the roof. When I got out to the top, I felt a blast of cold night air against my skin, and then I was shocked by something. I could only see my 3 friends on the roof. I felt for sure that I was about to be pranked, but I decided to ask the obvious question. "Guys, weren't there others up here with you?" We just looked at one another, puzzled for a while in silence. The wind blew, and then suddenly, we all heard a terrible voice calling, "Oi!" Someone started running and we all followed. We bolted down through the abandoned hospital, through the gap in the fence, and I took a look back at the roof. And I swear, I saw shadowy figures moving back and forth on the roof. The wind carried the dreadfully moaning oi sound, and we scrambled into the car and hightailed it out of there. We stopped at the closest light source, which happened to be a convenience store, and we never went back.
The hospital I worked for back in the early 2000s was old as hell, and I guarantee there are other things walking around those halls that we can't see. It was built in the early 1900s, but most of the building actually went through a major overhaul to update it except for one part of it, which housed the chapel, gift shop, and the bell, in order to keep its original roots, I suppose. But as for the creepy part of this place, we seem to have a chain of deaths that followed in a specific room, almost like a curse. I still hate saying it because I'm always like, well, gee, if we did our job, they wouldn't have died, right? But it's always been these crazy phenomena that lead up to them. The first one I remember was a lady that came in that seemed to have the start of dementia. She came in with burn injuries due to pretty much trying to set her clothes on fire to warm up, as she was cold. Thankfully, someone was home to put her out, but unfortunately just wasn't nearby to see or know what she was doing. She was going through the normal treatment and responding well to it. I even had a conversation with her that was pretty normal, but then out of nowhere, she began seizing and died. I heard that her cause of death was unrelated to the burns or the treatment and medication that she took for it, which I suppose did make those of us that cared for her feel a little better, but it was still one of those unexpected deaths that punches you in the gut and makes you feel bad. But life goes on in a hospital and new patients come in, including a man that was being seen for a stroke. He was in a different ward and was then moved upstairs to our ward and into room 224, as the physical therapy rooms were up there too. Again, he had gone through some PT, came back and was in good spirits because he was starting to get feeling back in his arm and leg. That ended when the next day he coded and nothing we did brought him back and he passed. His death was related to heart failure, however, but still, it was upsetting. This continued to happen over a few months, I believe it was. Patient would go to that room, would be fine, then on day 2 or 3, they would die. What's worse is that we thought we were smarter. We had one patient that after their first night, we moved him to a different room to try and prevent his demise. He still ended up passing, and from then on, room 224 was fine, and then 226 was having recurring casualties. We all joked about it being a curse, but after the 5th or 6th, I believe, I think it became a little more serious for us nurses. We tried to avoid the room at all costs. We double roomed or triaged out once when we could just to not use it, but unfortunately, there came a time that we couldn't avoid it. It was one of those strange occurrences where it was the weekend, there was some kind of show going on nearby, people were getting drunk and being stupid, those kinds of days, so we started filling up quicker than normal. One of the heads told one of the other nurses to move someone to room 226, and she hesitated and tried to come up with every excuse she could to not put someone in there. However, the head didn't give a damn, not believing in anything supernatural, and told her if she didn't do it, she would. She started making her way to move the patient there and gathered her things. Then she started freaking out, causing the hair on my neck to stand. I was at the nurse's station when I suddenly heard the lady yelling, so I came over, already aware of what was going on prior to see what happened. This middle-aged woman, who was soft-spoken and optimistic in her recovery, was now pale and pleading not to take her to that room. As I remember it, she was saying things like, "Please, I don't want to go in there, please. I'll die in there, please." The other nurse tried to calm her down and tell her she will be okay and that she won't die, although I could hear the shaking in her voice. The patient continued screaming, "No, please, they'll kill me. They'll all kill me, please. I don't want to die." She was unconsolable, so we got the head nurse and explained what was happening. So instead, she put her back in her room and put the new patient in there. When we put her back in her room, her nurse tried consoling her again and asked her about it, and she mentioned how she felt an overwhelming sense of dread in that room, and she didn't want to be around it. And that alone spooks me. Sure enough, however, the younger looking guy that went in for an ear infection died the next day, from again, something unrelated. The other nurse there was freaking out, and rightfully so. We never want to lose a patient, but then having this feeling that it could have been avoided really takes a toll on you. After some arguing and one nurse threatening to walk out, we finally got them to agree to not use that room anymore. To our relief, and unfortunately our horror, the unexpected death stopped. We've talked about it on many occasions and even told a few new hires why we avoid the room. We eventually began using it as a storage room. That way, there was no way it would get used again. I don't know what happened at that hospital, but after witnessing that, I don't even want to know.
This is a true story which happened to me when I was in high school. Two of my best friends and I decided to go urban exploring. We didn't know it was urban exploring at that time, and we treated it like a dare, a test of our collective courage. We headed to a nearby mountain, and it was very high, and at the summit of the mountain was a square. Just beside the mountain, on the road below, lay an abandoned hospital. Our plans were to explore the hospital, then afterwards head up the mountain and then drink some beer as a kind of a toast. One of my friends had sneaked a few cans from his dad, and we each stuffed one in our backpacks. We said to our parents that we were having a sleepover at one another's houses so we could be out all night, and we entered the abandoned hospital at exactly midnight. There were metal beds, medical equipment, glass cabinets, papers, and lots of things strewn around the place. Everything was in disarray, and the moonlight filtered in through the cracks in the aging building. I didn't hear or see anything strange or spooky in there, but I got this feeling in the pit of my stomach that something wasn't quite right with this place. I thought that I was getting creeped out because we had come here for that purpose, like this was how you were supposed to feel in places like this. But then I realized this was something more complex than that feeling. I was getting specific chills, the kind you get when you're laid up in bed with some kind of flu or fever. These chills felt like they were in my body. I didn't want to be the first to say that I was scared, and I knew that I would be ridiculed if I did. We then left the abandoned hospital. We headed up the mountain on a narrow straight road, and we walked in a line of 3, with me being at the back. I was thankful that it was a bright night. The road ahead was lit up by the pale moon, and it made me notice the tree line on either side of the road. We were in the middle of nowhere. We kept walking up the mountain road, and the further we walked, the sicker I felt. That internal chill was still with me. Then, something else strange. I heard strange whispering sounds and tree branches breaking from either side of the narrow mountain road. I kept looking over expecting to see people in those trees, but there wasn't anyone there. There shouldn't be anyone there. I knew this mountain well. And beyond that tree line was nothing but waist-high boulders and trees, and either side of the road had a cliff edge about 2 meters away. There really shouldn't be a person there, and if there was, I should be able to see them or hear them moving more clearly. There was definitely a voice coming from those trees, though. I couldn't make out what it was saying. It didn't even sound like words, just nonsensical gibberish. It frightened me because I could hear it on the right side occasionally, and then on the left. I swear, I heard it from above at one point too. And as crazy as that sounds, it seemed to follow us up that mountain. Stranger still, whenever I went to ask my friends if they were hearing what I was hearing, I couldn't speak. It was like sleep paralysis. Literally, the signal from my brain was not getting to my throat. It was the strangest thing. And there I was, heading up the hill, legs working fine, but mouth firmly shut. I noticed that my friends were silent too. Were they experiencing the same thing? We finally reached the summit of the mountain, and the voice in the tree seemed to fade away, and we were stood in the square at the top when I could finally speak. We are at the summit. Oh, right. It was a conversation just like that. We stood there in the dark beneath the pale moonlight, almost in silence, and I could see everyone's faces in now. Then one of my friends said, "Well, shall we drink these beers?" "Yeah," the other replied. But then suddenly, I heard a bang. It sounded like a gunshot, and suddenly, my body felt lighter. We all just ran down for it on the opposite side of the mountain. Nobody said a thing, not even screaming. It was really dangerous, as a slip would have sent us tumbling. We were going so fast, I didn't feel sick, and I didn't have the chills anymore. And when we were down the mountain, I learned that I wasn't the only one who felt the chills and heard the voices on either side of the road. They also said that they felt like they couldn't speak. And when we were talking about what had happened, I noticed that something was dripping from my friend's backpack. When I told him, he quickly opened it, and the can of beer he had in his bag had burst. Me and my other friends checked our bags, and our cans of beers had burst in the same manner. I guess that was the sound that we heard at the summit. I asked a teacher at school why a can might suddenly burst. He said that there are a number of reasons. Fermentation and a drastic change in temperature would be the main reasons. I asked if 3 cans could simultaneously explode in 3 separate bags up a small mountain. And he said that the chances of that happening would be near on impossible. Of course, none of my friends or I have ever went near that hospital or that mountain ever again. And I have never felt anything like that before or since. Something is out there.
I was a nurse for several years at a small local hospital in my state. I had some pretty weird interactions with patients, but there was one that I've never forgotten about. I was actually still a fairly new nurse at the time, so I more so followed the head nurse around and helped the other nurses, or was even their little errand dog for a while. I get it, I suppose, being new and having to earn the respect or create your own reputation. So when I noticed certain things when visiting a patient, I'd always check with the other nurses or the patient's file if they were aware of something. In this case, we had a patient that came in for a routine surgery. He was an older gentleman, maybe in his 70s, I believe. The surgery went fine, there were no complications, and even his recovery went fine. We even had things prepared and were warned that, due to other conditions he had, he may need oxygen longer than we normally do after surgery, but we never did. On one of those days after surgery, when he was awake and cognizant, I was assigned to help him with cleaning him up and checking vitals, etc. I remember having an everyday conversation with him, something like the weather. He mentioned his wife and dog, and even his plans for the upcoming summer vacation. Then, right before I was leaving, I asked him if there was anything else I could do for him, and as he looked at me smiling, he said, "When I die, just be sure to check my legs. That's all." I looked at him puzzled because, as far as I was aware of his reason for being there and the surgery he had, he wasn't dying. The surgery wasn't even really a life or death situation. I think he had cysts being removed on his back or something similar. So I asked him, "What do you mean, Mr. Smith? Your surgery went perfectly." He just smiled again and said, "I know," and laid on his side watching TV. I just left the room and thought this should be a funny conversation to have with the others. I went and told them about it too, and they agreed that there were no complications and no reason he would die, so they chalked it up to him just being old, possibly memory issues, or maybe being confused from the surgery, and we all just kind of left it at that. Then the day of discharge came, and his wife was there, helping get his stuff all packed and together. The guy mentioned he was feeling a bit ill, like his stomach was upset, so they gave him something like Pepto to help, saying it was probably a mix of stress of leaving and eating solid foods, and helped push the wheelchair out the door. They didn't even make it out of the building before he dropped his cup of water and seemed to lose consciousness. They brought him back in and started procedures to help bring him back. His heart rate had slowed dramatically, so they had to go through the normal life-saving procedures to bring him back. Thankfully, his consciousness did return, but we kept him overnight again to monitor him and do more tests. He didn't have any prior health conditions that could have caused this, so it bewildered all of us. I was off the day he was being discharged, so I learned what happened when I returned the next day from both the nurses and himself. He was a talker, so he told me what had happened, be it in his light and joking manner though. However, he didn't seem to get better. He continued to lose consciousness or felt ill, so we kept him to look at doing more tests, part of that being his wife's request. Some of the nurses were talking about it at the station, and for some reason, I remembered what he had told me before. I thought maybe it was worth bringing up to the others to see if it may be important. As expected, they thought this was something said by someone still feeling the effects of the anesthesia and thought nothing else of it, so I didn't press it. Being a newbie, I figured it was probably out of place for me to question another nurse or doctor's decision, so I decided to keep it to myself. Except it wasn't that easy because the same patient complained about having troubles breathing and pain in his chest. I knew these were both signs of blood clots, so I tried to quickly look him over and ask him questions about how he was feeling when he had stopped responding and started coding. He had no pulse whatsoever. I immediately called out for assistance, and as others came in, they began helping with CPR and going through our normal procedures in these situations. And when we finally got a pulse back, I was able to point out to them what I was worried about. His leg had turned blue and purple. Again, another sign of blood clots. We immediately set him up for surgery and got him all fixed up. One of the nurses got mad at me, basically accusing me of holding back information that could have killed a patient, when I explained to them that I brought this up days prior. Thankfully, others agreed that that was definitely something anyone should have seen and thought it was impossible that they wouldn't have noticed it prior since he had sat on the edge of the bed with his legs out. But it would be incredible for it to turn purple like that in one day. After the surgery, test, and exercises to prevent the same thing from happening, he was finally feeling and looking better. No more passing out, so he was about to leave again. I had been working on the other side of the floor, so I didn't get to see him much, but I wanted to wish him well before he left. When I got to talking with him, I brought up the clot and asked him how he knew about it or if he had a history of them, and he had no idea what I was talking about. He didn't even remember making the comment to me about it. In fact, someone else told him that I pointed it out, and he wanted to thank me as I saved his life. I didn't know what to say other than take the compliments and gratitude and move on. I know this may not necessarily be too creepy, but that was one of the most bizarre cases I had while at that hospital. I've definitely learned to trust my gut in those situations, no matter how much the other nurses may mock me or look at me funny. It could literally save a life.
"3 years ago, I was admitted to the hospital with kidney stones. It was horrible. On the first day, I was pretty much okay during the daytime, but at night, I felt pain like you wouldn't believe. It really was the worst pain that I have ever felt in my life. It got so bad that night that I was thinking of calling the nurse, but I thought that I would try to endure it for as long as possible. I thought that, if the stone passed, the pain would go away. I had been there sweating trying to endure the pain for about an hour, and when the door opened, I thought to myself, during this hour no patients came and went, so I guess it must be a nurse doing some rounds. Oh great, maybe I'll get some painkillers, I thought. Not you. I heard a male voice mutter in a soft voice. It seemed like the owner of that voice was shuffling around in slippers. He was going around the beds, and I was in a 6-bedroom, and at night all the partition curtains were drawn. It sounded like this person was looking for something, as I heard him once again mutter, "Not you," as he passed around the room. I started to feel sick and chills were shooting up my back. I was really suffering with the pain. I could see a silhouette through the partition curtains. I didn't want this guy to know that I was awake because then I would have to speak to him. And because I was hurting, there was no way that I wanted to have a chit-chat. I laid my head on the pillow and closed my eyes. And the next thing I knew, it was morning. Because I was new in the hospital, I felt that I didn't know the people in my room well enough to ask them about last night. Like I said, I was in a 6-bedroom, and everyone in here seemed to be in for various minor issues. I read the room and understood that it wasn't a particularly talkative bunch. No one wants to chat much if they are in pain, I guess. After a day or two passed, there was a change in the room. The guy who was next to me left, and the new guy came in. The new guy was a middle-aged man. He was more talkative than the others, and we had a short conversation, and he told me that he was in the hospital with gastric pain, and he suspected it was a stomach ulcer. He said that he would be moving on to another ward after the surgery. I was still in pain with the descent of the stones into my bladder, and it was getting really bad now. The pain was back with a vengeance. It was nighttime when the pain got worse again. It was similar to that night, and I heard the man walk around the ward. Then, just like clockwork, I heard the same low male voice mutter, "Not you." What the hell was this guy doing here again? I wondered. Then I heard him say something different for the first time. "You," he said. I heard his voice very close to my ear. I couldn't turn my body to face that direction due to the pain, and I could only turn my head. Maybe it was more than just pain, come to think of it. Maybe some unknown fear prevented me from moving. There was a man who stood beside the bed next to me. I thought about the voice and I started to think about the Grim Reaper. I managed to convince myself that that guy in the next bed would die soon. I don't know why these thoughts entered my brain, but the next thing I did was even weirder. I tried to summon enough energy to throw open the partition curtains, and I felt waves of panic wash over my mind. I didn't know what I was about to see. With the curtain now slightly pushed aside, I could see a man stood by the bed. He was wearing a white patient's gown and he was just a feeble and frail old man. I stared at him confused and dazed, and then he just shuffled his way out of the room. I thought that I was making a fuss out of nothing, and I was ashamed that I allowed my imagination to run away with me. The next morning, I passed a stone. Then in the afternoon, the doctor told me that I was going to be discharged that day. And that was a relief. The guy in my bed next to me was gone and I didn't know where he went. I was still kind of weirded out by the events of last night. Surely, if there was a guy walking around at night, the patients or the staff must have known about it. But no one seemed to know what I was talking about when I asked. Before I left, and now that I was able to move, I decided to take a little walk to see if I could find the guy who was next to me in the 6th bedroom. Something about him just lingered on my mind, and I didn't like it. I wanted to settle my curiosity, and I hope he was okay. I went and asked the doctor about him, and I found out that the man was now in the intensive care ward. He looked almost unconscious. He looked very thin, and his face was almost expressionless. There was only a little pink left in his cheeks. I think I escaped something unworldly in that hospital.
Hello. You made it to the end. That's great. Yay. Then I should probably say that this was a collection of hospital stories. The place we go to hopefully be relieved of concerns and make us better. And yet, somehow, we still can walk out of there feeling uncertain or scared. I hate going to the doctors. I swear, it's like going to get your car worked on. You go in there for one specific thing and they're like, oh, by the way, you might have this wrong with you and you should come in to do a physical, and I don't need to know all that. I just want to know what's wrong with my throat right now. And then maybe get one of those sweet stickers at the end. No? You guys don't get stickers? Oh. Well then, moving on, I hope you enjoyed this collection. And I also wanted to take a moment to thank Miss Creepy Tales MCT for being on my video again. I really appreciate it, and she has just been phenomenal to work with. So if you haven't already, do check out her channel and subscribe to her if you haven't already. Her links will be in the description down below. And again, thank you, Miss Creepy Tales. I appreciate it. In the meantime, if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. It helps out the channel. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing if you haven't already. I always love seeing new faces. And lastly, don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts on these stories. If you have any feedback on any of them, feedback is always welcome. Just remember to be respectful as well. You can also just leave me a comment telling me how you're doing. Or maybe a little bit about you. Do you have any pets? I have 3 cats and 2 turtles. So let me know. And with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. And until next time, take care.